Technically, this is a 1929 Model A Roadster that's powered by a flathead V8. But to millions of people around the world, it's simply a hot rod. For many years, the terms hot rod and hop-up were very unpopular with the roadster builder. He worked very hard on his car, and he took a lot of pride in it. And when somebody called it a hot rod, it burned him up. Because in those days, hot rod was a name given to any jalopy that lacked fenders and a muffler and scared little old ladies. But try as he may, he couldn't get people to call his car a roadster. It was a hot rod, and that's all there was to it. So it was decided by the rapidly growing membership of this new sport that if they were going to be called hot rodders, they would try to make the name respectable. As I'm sure most of you know, that battle's still going on. And although it's not over, there have been many victories. And that's what our story is about. The hot rodder's tough climb up the mountain of respectability and the fantastic achievements of mechanical ingenuity, beauty, and performance he's made along the way. Hot rodding got its start in Southern California back in the late 20s and early 30s. And strangely, Mother Nature played the most important role. The mild weather was ideal for roadsters, and the lack of rain enabled you to run without fenders most of the year. But where she really helped was in providing a spot where, by word of mouth, roadster enthusiasts would gather to test and later time their cars. This area is protected from the storms that come in off the Pacific Ocean by huge mountain ranges that hold back the clouds. Without moisture and cloud cover, the sun really beats down, causing the temperature to rise above the normal. The result of all this heat and dryness is the Mojave Desert. And to survive under these conditions takes something special. Like, man, you got to be a pretty crazy-looking tree just to make it out here. And the animals are kind of a rough-looking bunch, too. In fact, it even helps if you're just a little bit poisonous. But once in a while, the storms will be so severe that they will break over the mountains, and the desert will be flooded by tremendous cloudbursts. This sudden moisture causes the desert to bloom. Now stop grumbling. I know you're not here to learn about flowers. The water also does something important, very important to our story. As it rushes over the ground, it carries with it a sort of dirt called alkali. And after thousands of years of this, it filled the low valleys with its fine silt. Then the sun baked it, and you've ended up with a unique feature of the area called a dry lake. It was to this paradise that a few exploring hot rodders came back in the late 20s. It was certainly well suited for speed trials, and the word soon spread. More and more enthusiasts came, and without any supervision or organization, it got pretty hairy, what with 11 guys going flat out in all directions. But in 1937, 5 car clubs joined forces and formed the Southern California Timing Association. This was to be the foundation for the whole hot rod sport. One nice thing about running at the lakes, everybody was friendly. Hi, Vita. Hi, Carl. That's Carl Orr, the guy that originated the term speed shop. This is Chuck Potman, who later became a manufacturer of speed equipment. Oh, hi there. In fact, most of today's speed equipment manufacturers were early dry lace competitors. Guys like Vic Edelbrock, Ed Eskandarian, Bill Wyan, hi there, Paul Schiefer, Stu Hilburn, and many more. For you younger people in the audience, this is a Ford Flathead V8. It was in this class, called Streamliners in those days, that Hilburn would become the first hot rodder to go 150 miles an hour. In 1946, after the war, interest in hot rodding really began to grow. There were 2 major factors in this terrific expansion. One of them was the formation of clubs. The SCTA had 31 by this time just in Southern California. I checked with the International Car Club Association to see how many clubs there were today all over the country, and I was really surprised to learn that there are over 10,000. Now that the interest was growing and clubs were being formed, there was a real need for some form of communication between hot rodders nationwide. That need was fulfilled on January the 1st, 1948, when in a one-room office in the rear of this building, Hot Rod magazine was born. Today, Peterson Publishing Company covers almost a full block on Hollywood Boulevard, and in addition to Hot Rod, publishes 7 other monthly magazines and many books. From a very modest beginning with 1 employee, Robert E. Peterson now needs over 200 to help him with his growing business. Pete has always been a rabid hot rod enthusiast, and Hot Rod is still his favorite magazine. Bob Green is the editor of Hot Rod, but he's got a lot of talented help. Ray Brock was in Africa on assignment with Don Francisco when we were in the office. Eric Rickman was out shooting pictures. In fact, Bob was pretty busy himself. Tom Medley, who originated the cartoon character Stroker McGurk, is in charge of advertising, and I'd hate to tell you what the rates are to advertise in Hot Rod. Today, any good magazine stand has a terrific selection of automotive magazines and books, but back in 1948, Hot Rod was the pioneer, and it was rough going for a while. But from an early circulation of less than 30,000, it has zoomed to over 750,000. And combined with the others, the total circulation is over 10 million, plus several good newspapers like Drag News. You're darn right hot rodding's popular. But back to our story. After the war, there began to be a change in the roadsters at the lakes. The guys started to build more streamlined cars. Channeling, which is lowering the body over the frame, became popular. And the smaller sized T-body was used. Many fine cars were built. A young 18-year-old named Don Waite really started something with the first T-Roadster with the engine in the rear. There were some surplus belly tanks for sale around L.A. at the time, and they were being used for bodies in the Streamliner class. The team of Bill Burke and Don Francisco came up with the first rear-engine model, and this was the start of what would later become famous as the Lakester. As the membership climbed above 1,000, the old lake beds were taking quite a beating. And as the speeds continued to climb, safety became a concern. When the sun set over the Mojave in August of 1949, it signaled the passing of an important period of hot rodding. But the dawn brought with it a new era that would result in speeds beyond the wildest dreams of the early hot rod pioneers. And strangely enough, once again, Mother Nature provided the site. It took millions of years, but the end result was the bottom of a huge lake covered with 5 million tons of salt spread over 3,000 square miles. For the first time, hot rodders had been invited to compete at the mecca of the speed world, the Bonneville Salt Flats. When they arrived, they were informed by a sign that this was the world's fastest racing course. The sign also had a challenge. It told them that a man, John Cobb of England, had flashed across this salt at 403 miles an hour, faster than any other man on Earth. The hot rod record at the lakes in those days was 153 miles an hour, but although it seemed impossible, the challenge was accepted and they began to sign up. The first meet drew only 49 entries, of which I'm happy to say I was one. The SCTA had hauled all their lakes equipment about 700 miles across the desert and then had to assemble it out on the salt. Most of it was towed behind this old panel truck and a little V860 for power. What a trip that was. The finish line stand was also built as a trailer, and it was here that J. Otto Crocker set up his timer. In those days, it didn't look too impressive, but it was very accurate, recording speeds to the 1,000th of a mile an hour. The salt was as hard as we had heard it was. Communication was a real problem, but luckily some of the members were also phone company employees and knew about such things. Wire was laid out for the full 10 miles with a phone tower every 2 miles in case a car had trouble along the course. The distances involved at Bonneville are almost unbelievable. and the guy on the phone way down at the 10-mile post was really out of it. If they hadn't painted a line to follow, we probably never would have found our way back to the starting line. Several companies transported their facilities right out to the salt for the convenience of the participants. Bell Auto Parts assembled a speed shop right on the salt. And Firestone set up a tent to service the special Bonneville tires that the high-speed cars ran. The condition of the course each year depended largely upon the weather of the previous winter and spring. Under some conditions, a hard, rough crust would form, and the Utah State Highway Department would supply the equipment needed to drag and prepare the course. At times, this work would go on all night so as not to delay the schedule of the meet. There have been times during a meet when the sudden cloudburst would leave the flats a lake once again, but the water would soon soak in and everything would be okay. The soft, wet salt would spray back on the cars, making them look like it had been a snowstorm. But generally the course would be beautiful, clean, smooth, and as far as the eye could see, solid salt. Really a fantastic place. And right from the very first, Bonneville inspired the hot rodders. Streamlining became more important at the new, faster speed, and everyone tried to outdo his competitor in the hope of gaining an advantage by better design. Tom Ruddy favored in closing as much of the front end as possible, and it got him into the 200-mile-an-hour club. Now, Ack Miller, he always used the pointed nose. And Don Waite preferred a knife-edge nose and fairing around the exposed axle. He also didn't believe in leaving too much room for the driver. And when he did get into position, they taped him in. Anything for a little more streamlining. They weren't good enough to get the record, though, at 187 miles an hour. The Summer Brothers rear engine T combined brute horsepower and streamlining with outstanding results. They made a record average of over 225 miles an hour with this little bomb. Fred Larson's front engine T is king of the modified roadsters now. Fastest time, 240.642 miles an hour. It wasn't just the roadster classes that were being streamlined. The coupes and sedans were receiving their share of chopping and handling. And here again, the object was to out-chop the other guy. Mickey Thompson's first Bonneville car was this twin-engine machine, good for almost 200 miles an hour. And I had a 34 coupe with a couple inches out of the top myself. And here's an excellent shot of it leaving the starting line, heading down the salt. Our coupe did over 175, but this one blew us off at 180. It's Art Christmas' beautiful little rear-end Model A coupe. Gary Cagle got carried away and came up with this T-coupe. I guess that's what it was. I was afraid to ask. Pretty wild, whatever it is. But if you think that's wild, how about this 34? Look, Mom, no rear window. How about this sedan? Guess what that used to be? The Lakester classes remained a favorite, and the speeds have continued to climb until today. These open-wheel cars are exceeding the streamliner records of just a few years ago. Speeds are up to 280 miles an hour, which makes them the fastest open-wheel cars in the world by far. The only streamliner they could do is put the man down inside, which they did. One of the old hands with the tank is Tom Beatty, who used to run this one for years, and still is. There have been some at Bonneville who prefer to do it with brute horsepower, pushing the biggest object they can through the air at remarkable speeds. Jim Lindsley stuffed 2 Chryslers in this Channel 32 Roadster and went 202 with it. Big Bill Edwards put a blown cad in this big box, jammed it through at 151 miles an hour. Fantastic feat. And then Tony Waters and Jim Shagrew of the Bakersfield Smokers put a blown DeSoto in this Highboy 32 Roadster and became the first ones to push a Highboy over 200 miles an hour. The time, 210 miles an hour. Even a few of the bike riders got carried away. How'd you like to jump on that and go 157 miles an hour? The use of stock bodies began to grow in popularity. Sanchez and Cagle were among the first. Their choice of the 53 Studi body was forerunner of many outstanding cars of this model. Speeds rose from an original 140 miles an hour up to 230 in this class. Of course, the strain of pushing these big cars down the salt often proves too much for the engines, like this one out of the Sanchez Studi. The insides got all mixed up together, and the pistons seemed to grip the cylinder wall rather snugly. And the bearings lost interest in what they were supposed to do. It's really quite sickening. Dean Moon put his unblown Chrysler in the Hot Rod Magazine Plymouth called Suddenly, and it turned 183 miles an hour, outstanding for the year 1957. One of the most beautiful roadsters to run at Bonneville was Don Rackman's award winner. They were voted Outstanding Car and Crew in 1956. But the class that really got the Hot Rodder his first worldwide recognition was the Streamliner. By the second meet, 2 cars had broken through the 200-mile-an-hour barrier, and hot rodding was really on its way. This was one of them, the twin-engine Kins-Leslie car. It went on to fastest time of the meet for several years. Howard Johansson came up with a unique design for Bonneville with his twin-tank Streamliner. It had less frontal area than the standard Streamliners, but handling problems kept it from reaching its potential. The Hill Davis CT Special was destined for a special place in the hot rod story. This car became the first hot rod to hold a world speed record. In 1952, it averaged 230 miles an hour to establish a new international Class C record, previously held by the giant German Automobile Combine Auto Union. This was one of the largest streamliners ever to run at a Bonneville meet. Designed after Cobb's car, an accident damaged it and it never ran again. Chet Herbert built several Streamliners over the years, preferring the large bumps over the wheels and narrow body style. Art Chrisman drove one at 235.91 miles an hour. The Shadoff Special, built by Mal Hooper, was the next world record car. It upped the Class C record to 236 in 1953 with Mal at the wheel. Bob Bowen, shown here after a run, drove the car to several international records, including the World Class C at 251 and the Class B at 272 miles an hour. Bob Herta has built several streamliners, and each one has been a construction masterpiece. An aircraft engineer by profession, you can certainly see it in his work. In 1955, Bill Kins was back. And this time he had 3 flathead Ford engines in his streamliner. That meant 12 carburetors. And when they had to change jets, man, it was an all-day job. With his partner Roy Leslie at the wheel, the car remained the fastest of the meet for 3 more years, reaching its peak average of 266 in 1957. With a one-way top of 270 miles an hour. In 1958, Mickey Thompson stopped by on his way to the Nationals with a new twin-engine streamliner. And when he got the record at 266.866, Mickey was on his way, turning 330 in 1959. The motorcycle riders had to stretch out to streamline, which resulted in a thrilling ride, but a stiff neck. But Bonneville being Bonneville, the bike guys got the streamlining bug too, and began enclosing their machines with a body shell. This one covers a standard motorcycle, and the rider can support it in the normal way by sticking his legs out through the holes in the body. But Bonneville being Bonneville, naturally somebody had to get a little wilder. There was no provision for the rider to hold this one up. And although this design proved very efficient at high speed, its low-speed stability was poor. Then there's the fall-down push start. It works a little better. This bike with a 90-inch Harley Davidson turned 224 miles an hour. With some refinement, this Triumph was back again, and this time they had a more efficient way to push. That is, if everybody pushes, fella. Streamlined two-wheeler with 40 cubic inches turned a remarkable 214 miles an hour. In 1960, Thompson returned to the salty crust of Bonneville. His car was aptly named Challenger 1, for this was the first hot rod to really have a chance to answer that challenge we first saw on the sign in 1949. Mickey was loaded for bear. The car was powered by 4 supercharged Pontiacs. It had turned 354 in an early trial run, which made Mick not only the fastest hot rodder, but the fastest American. But the challenge was 403 miles an hour, and that was the goal he had set for himself. I haven't the slightest idea how it must feel to know that soon, if everything goes all right, you may be crossing the surface of the earth at 7 miles a minute. But destiny apparently picked the right man. Mickey is perfectly calm as he settles back in his cramped cockpit. Even mighty Bonneville is calm as the wind gauge drops to 0. The course is near perfect, and the car accelerates beautifully. The car flashes through the timing lights. They are recording the fastest time that man has ever crossed the surface of this earth. In just over 10 years since the first hot rod ran at Bonneville, the challenge had been answered. Mickey Thompson had gone 406.60 miles an hour and somebody remembered to change that sign. In 1961, Arfons ran his big streamliner. The driver sat well out in front, but behind him pushed a big aircraft engine. Once it got you going, it took quite a bit to stop you, including a drag chute. This car had fastest time of the meet at 313 miles an hour average. The Summer brothers were back, this time with a streamliner of their own, and it was a beauty. It looked like a three-wheeler because the rear wheels were in line, one behind the other. With the driver enclosed with the engine and the fumes from the fuel, an oxygen mask is a must. The car became the first single-engine automotive car to break 300 miles an hour when it averaged 302. And there were smaller streamliners. Ever since Thompson exceeded Cobb's speed, there have been persistent rumors that the British had been secretly building a car in New Zealand to retake the record. We were very excited when we heard it had just arrived. Beautiful. Looks like they drove it all the way, right across the bottom of the ocean. Unfortunately, we couldn't let it run. It had right-hand drive. Then it's 1963, and once again they are gathered way out on the salt to test their cars. It's hard to believe that it's been 15 years since we first came to Bonneville, all wide-eyed at its tremendous size and reputation. At the first meet, no one reached the 200-mile-an-hour mark. In 1963, 22 cars exceeded that speed. 5 of them over 300 miles an hour. There's been other changes, too. They don't broil out in the sun like we used to. And they certainly come better prepared than we did. Bob Herter is an excellent example. Not only does he have an arc welder, he's also got a drill press and an air compressor. And even a garden hose in case he wants to water something. There are several small streamliners now. This one with a little 4-cylinder engine turned 222 miles an hour. In fact, they seem to be getting smaller each year. But this is ridiculous. Yes, it's a real car named claustrophobia for obvious reasons. A man actually gets in there, don't ask me how, and with the engine, which is 2.5 cubic inches, churning away, it runs through the traps at 55 miles an hour. The cylinder is just about as big as a shot glass, if you know what I mean. Summer brothers were back with top time of the meet at 316. And the interest in the stock body classes continued to grow. This is Lou Bainey's Jekyll Brothers Plymouth. Lou is either tuning the engine or testing that fender. The fastest super stock is owned and driven by a 62-year-old grandfather named Norm Thatcher, who lead-footed it through at 195 miles an hour. But some things never change. Hack Miller still believes a pointed nose is the answer, and he may be right. He's still setting records. Big Bill Edwards still likes to make trucks go fast. He's got this one up to almost 180. And they still have high-boy roadsters. And do they run? They've got them up to 222 miles an hour now. Down at the finish line, there's been quite an improvement, both in comfort and efficiency. Auto has lots of help now. And his new timer is much more impressive. And its accuracy is accepted throughout the world. So Bonneville continues to be a vast research and development center for hot rodding, with several cars being designed to try for 500 miles an hour. For some, the strain has been too great. But for most, the battle goes on. One favorite area of research has been in the creation of exotic fuel mixtures capable of great increases in horsepower. Sometimes it requires a small amount of some secret ingredient to change a common fuel like methanol into something so explosive that it should be handled with great care. The tension of working with these compounds can affect the person working with them. In fact, this guy looks a little weird. Remember, I said handle it with care. Atta boy. What? I think this weirdo's getting an idea for something never tried before. Salt? Well, it's never been tried before, and there's a lot of it around.